This episode is brought to you by Audi. The road is calling. Embrace the thrill of the drive with the all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. Featuring effortless power, serious acceleration, and advanced Audi tech. It's not just a new EV. It's a new way to experience driving. The all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron is here. The next chapter of Audi starts now.
You are tuned in to the FowlWeather Podcast, the forecast to your next successful hunt. Coming to you from the home office, Jack's Reef, New York.
All you ever wanted to know about King Greenhead in this 4-part series about the history of the North American mallard. In part 2, we hit the highlights about what makes the greenhead population tick. What runs the mallard population? How does winter, spring, and summer make the mallard machine run? Dead hens don't lay eggs, right? But fat hens do. Find out how fat hens run the mallard world and how bugs and wetlands matter for ducklings, hens, and the old greenhead himself. All that today on the FowlWeather Podcast. Plus, we play catch-up on the winter 2025 evolution of the polar vortex and La Nina. The heat is on in the mid-continent and western prairies. All explained today on the FowlWeather Podcast. Remember that this last season you knew where the ducks were at before the ducks knew where they were at. We're very thankful for our every week listeners. You folks know who you are. Those that never miss a single migration forecast episode each Monday morning. Y'all are as ate up as me about ducks, duck biology, and duck migration. Our dedicated weekly listeners can pick the best days to hunt because the FowlWeather Podcast forecasts fresh ducks hot from the north. You know where the ducks are at before the ducks know where they're at. So you can shoot the ducks from the north before they know where they're at. I'm your host, Dr. Mike, coming to you from the home office in Jack's Reef. Well, we are deep into the depth of winter at the farm, and actually we recorded this episode ahead of our annual ice fishing trip to the Adirondack Mountains that happened this last weekend. It's now an annual tradition. I'm thinking we're at least 8 years deep into that fishing trip. Maybe I've lost count, but it's a great group of people. Plow guys that keep our roads cleared in winter, police officers and prison guards that keep our lives safe, maintenance workers, an outdoor retail guy, another doctor that has like 8 doctorates. Dude, I guess, keeps our money secure or some cyber stuff like that. And one engineer, I guess, that makes fighter jet parts. These are great people from all walks of life that all come together in the outdoors to make it happen, catch fish, drink beers, play cards, and love all that the Adirondack Mountains and our wild places in our lives has to offer. These people are family. They are everything that embodies Jack's Reef country. They are definitively fish camp in the Adirondacks, and my moments with each of them has and will continue to define large portions of my life. We all have people and places that define us. To me, my rural roots define me and continue to do so, and I find people that I surround myself with that also define me. But also the Adirondacks are part of me and define me, like the snow and cold of my life. Anyhow, if you have not thanked your friends for being friends, do so. And thank them for being with you as you would for them. And at the end of the day, thank them for being part of the United States of America and wanting the best for each other. All right, so although we have certainly been plowing plenty of snow this year, it has not been our norm in the past few years. In fact, we've been really warm and snowless. So in those really warm and snowless years in Jack's Reef, it always gives us perspective when we head into the Adirondack Mountains and quickly hit 3-foot snowbanks on our drive as we hit the blue line. It is with perspective that we understand other places. I'm going to tell you what the blue line is here in a second. I've always loved the fact that I've lived here and there. I've been all around, and I've tried to actually live in places for months at a time, not just visit them to hunt And I guess my one regret is that it's not possible to truly live enough places in this great country in one's life. My wife and I have lived or worked in 38 states and 4 provinces as far as we can tell. I guess that was once the story, but we've also lost count. The reality is that I've been employed alone in New York, Pennsylvania, Maine, West Virginia, Missouri, Oklahoma, Mississippi, South Dakota, North Dakota, Wisconsin, Ohio, Manitoba, and Ontario. And I don't feel like any of that makes me well-traveled. And I'd like to do more. And I think some of you have done more. But any travel does provide one perspective as far as everybody else's lives go. And this weekend, I'll be traveling into the Blue Line in the Adirondacks again, once again. The Blue Line is that outline or the boundary of the Adirondack Park. Okay, that was a bad segue. I'll just leave it at that, but I just left it there. The Blue Line is the outline or the boundary of the Adirondack Park. Inside the Adirondack Park are many private inholding... Lost my train here. Inside the Adirondack Park are many inholdings, including many large tracts of land owned by timber industry. But there's also a bunch of forever wild portions of the Adirondack Park that also make it so special. The benefit to the people of New York and beyond is profound. These lakes, woods, and mountains are a complete playland for recreation, for hunters, for anglers, hikers, campers, skiing, snowmobiling, snowshoeing, everything that makes northern winter so wonderful. It all exists in the Adirondack Mountains of New York. I could not imagine a United States without the Adirondacks and all the great public land we have. You might not know this, but Yosemite, Yellowstone Glacier, and Grand Canyon National Parks could all fit inside the Blue Line boundary of the Adirondack Park in New York, and I couldn't imagine the United States being strong without this land for us and our limitless possibilities that we have to recreate in all these great places. At the FowlWeather Podcast, we truly believe that public land is among one of the defining entities of this country, that we are a United States of America and work to provide all the public, everyone, opportunities to embrace and fall in love with the outdoors. Anyhow, from the snowy windows of the farm at Jack's Reef, we don't think about just our own property boundaries. We also think about all the lakes, rivers, forests, and swamps of public land that make us whole. We only own 14 acres, but because we live in a great country, because we live in Duck Country, USA, we do live in a land of true opportunity. All right, before we dive into the old greenhead info, let's get a quick polar vortex and La Nina update. The polar vortex did just what we expected last episode and poured cold air into the mid-continent and eastern United States. It was partially pushed that way by a super warm wind coming in from equatorial regions of the Pacific Ocean that is advanced across California into the Rockies and as far north as southern Saskatchewan and Alberta. This warm flow has been melting the limited snow that has existed, maybe 5 to 10 inches of snow that had existed in southern portions of these provinces in their prairie regions. For early March, the eastern and northeast U.S. will continue in the cold phase, but what continues is the unfortunate mass of warm and melt in the western prairies way early before any snowpack can establish. All right, we should also acknowledge that this came just after very, very cold temperatures, so any melt should flow better into basins over frozen ground. That said, the long term does not forecast substantial snowfall into the prairie regions as we would have liked. The La Nina developed late, and in the growing season, the El Nino and La Nina events have much less effect. So as we move into the growing season, we should see less effect of the La Nina. It likely developed too late for a big snowfall event. It did produce some cold to the prairies as expected, and at the end of the day, the predictions from a slight La Nina are going to be kind of evident. But it wasn't what we needed for the ducks. It's now up to spring rains to help the ducks more in the prairies. right? Of course, a big March snowfall is possible, but it doesn't look good in the long term. Stay tuned to the FowlWeather Podcast for the most up-to-date breeding conditions for ducks. Up next, how old greenhead and his handsome hen make it from north to south and produce ducklings each year. So please stick with us. Look, folks, the Farmland Group across the Mid-South is your one-stop shop for real estate brokerage, consulting, management, lending, and appraisals. If you own land or you want land, the Farmland Group is where it's at. With over $500 million in farm sales and growing, Gwynn and Shelby Smith have you covered. Look, if you're thinking about buying or selling, contact the Farmland Group to access their full suite of services. If you already own property and want to build equity and value, the Farmland Group gets it done. If you're looking to purchase a new property, well, they get that done too, and they have access to some of the best lending available. Looking to sell? Get it appraised with the Farmland Group affiliated appraiser. But let's be clear for our listenership too. They also offer farm and hunt property management to create places that attract more ducks and more bucks. Who doesn't want that? More ducks and more bucks. Let the Farmland Group build value into your property. Find them today at farmlg.com. That's farmlg.com. You're not going to be disappointed. Contact Shelby Smith today at farmlg.com and let him know that the FowlWeather Podcast sent you their way. All right, and we are back to talk greenhead ecology and management. So let's tackle this as 1 year in the cycle of a mallard starting right now, the end of winter and into the spring migration. First and foremost, remember that we just went through the season of harvest and mallards were seeking food, but at the same time avoiding hunting pressure. Mallards were starting to pair in October. So throughout duck season, hens were pairing and losing mates all along as they got shot. This is just a fact for hens throughout duck season. But luckily, hey, there's an abundance of drake mallards available, and most of those hens repair with another drake within 24 hours. They're not super picky, because interestingly, being paired confers dominance among your community. Think about this. Dominance does not mean you get to pair. It is the fact that hens are literally just picking drakes so that they have dominance. So it is always more advantageous for hens to be paired because it provides behavioral dominance. 2 sets of eyes to avoid predators and 2 individuals to find food. Also remember that the rule is to get fat and survive. So once you're paired, you just get fat and you coast towards spring. Think of it this way. Once you hit January, it is hard to kill a mallard in mild weather. Why? Because they are coasting until spring. They are paired. A hen mallard and a drake mallard would rather sit next to a fallen down cherry bark oak in a flooded timber area than fly around and get shot at, right? These ducks are just riding out fat reserves that they already have and hiding in some sanctuary place without guns. Of course, when the weather gets severe, they still have to maintain their core body temperature, and as bed hedging, they still make movements so that they don't use too much of the fat they have. So like this year, when cold hits, all bets are off and life gets risky for old greenhead and that hen, and your hunting success goes up because they have to move around just to make sure that they have enough fat and they are holding on to what they have so that they can survive winter. So in winter, sanctuary in some shape, manner, or form matters because this is largely what these ducks seek. They don't want to move around. They don't want to expose themselves. There also needs to be enough energy on the landscape in the form of carbohydrates like moist soil, weed seeds, and tubers like barnyard grass, panic grass, and nutsedge tubers. Perennial plant seeds and tubers like acorns from oaks, but also bulrush seeds and arrowhead tubers. Aquatic vegetation like coontail and pondweeds. And at times, agricultural crops like rice and corn. Remember that the name of the game is to get fat and sit still once paired. So a major metric here is foods that enable fat storage in ducks so they can sit still and survive once paired. That is the winter game for a duck. This is why habitat managers in winter areas focus so much on food and sanctuary. As most folks know that shot lots of mallards this winter in the South, if you had food and sanctuary, you had mallards. Despite what you hear, lots of folks had lots of mallards in the mid and deep South this winter. This is also why the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service conservation planners use estimates of food on the ground to understand habitat deficits and where more habitat is needed to support the long-term average duck population and ensure we can send these ducks back strong to the north. All right, but now we are into more spring-like weather, and these ducks look to make their next step north. If they have enough energy reserves, they may make a movement on the next south wind. If not, they go into a mode of hyperphagia or eating more food than their bodies need daily. Hey, you're very familiar with this behavior because you do it each Thanksgiving and Christmas season. After months of losing weight, going through winter and just hanging out and losing that weight, not moving around unless they have to, the hen and drank mallard overeat and put on the lbs, the pounds. And once they hit a threshold of fat, they make that next jump north on a warm southern breeze. They fly at night because guess what you can't do at night? You don't tend to feed. So they fly at night north, maybe covering 1,000 miles in a single night. Now we are into spring staging, the spring staging period, as mallards get as far north as they can, but continually hit the snow and ice barrier. At this boundary between the greening spring and the frozen north, the ducks, the geese, all the swans, many birds are driven by instinct to get back north as soon as possible because it tends to be that early arrivals are generally the most successful nesters. You see, if you're a slacker, genetically programmed to be lazy and hang back, you were less successful and your genetic code was less likely to be passed on to the next generation. So at least under our current environment, there seems to be strong pressure to arrive early. Hey, but this does create a problem for our friend, the old greenhead and his hen that is running the show. Yes, we switching gears here. The male is kind of simply in tow. He's honestly just an end to a means. He's basically a flying bag of sperm that needs to be around at the right time, so she keeps him around. Guys, don't feel emasculated here. Everything in the bird world is about the women, so just be comfortable with that at this point. So the problem is that at this edge of the ice, where this drake mallard, this old greenhead, has followed his hen, where there's, ice to the north and green to the south, no new growth has happened yet, right? No new plants have grown. No new seeds have dropped. No new crop harvest has produced waste grain in the field. So what's left is what's left. There's not much. The spring migration is the true bottleneck for the mallard, right? Plus all their friends, all the other ducks, all the other geese, all the other swans are doing the same thing, jammed up against the freeze line. It's the complete opposite of the southward migration when food resources are basically ultra abundant and waterfowl are spread out on migration from Canada to Louisiana at times at the same month. At this point in the spring, all these birds are jammed up, maybe for long periods of time against the ice line. This is why waterfowl managers advocate for leaving water on your wetland until the ducks tell you they don't need it anymore and have left places for farther north. It's also why spring flooding of brand new habitats is important. If you haven't ever seen a river flood in spring, the ducks are all over it because it's a location that may not have been fed on and exploited during the fall migration. Because we know food is limiting in the spring, some wildlife management areas don't even flood drawn down impoundments until spring, making them super magnets for migrating ducks. We once had 25,000 pintails at Montezuma, just on the road from us, on a single 100-acre moist soil unit for over 20 days during spring migration a few years back. Here also lies a problem during spring. These ducks, as they start to push north, very often get caught at locations that start to freeze back up for long periods of time, and food resources can get really skimpy at some point. And hey, no duck has a crystal ball, and each year there are winners and losers, right? Imagine a duck hanging back a little bit and then having fat reserves to fly right past everyone else that struggled at the freeze line for 30 days with failing food resources. It's all a chaotic shuffle as these ducks drive north. So at the end of the day, providing the most food possible at all locations for spring migrating ducks is the best bet. We focus very much, we all do as duck hunters, we focus very much on fall and winter food resources, and they are certainly important, but they are probably not as important to the ducks as duck hunters. They are probably more important to the hunter and hunter success than they are duck population success compared to spring migration food resources. Again, food needs to be balanced and is important in all seasons, but it is definitely most important in spring for our migrating hens and her old greenhead in tow, who's just, as we've learned, a bag of sperm and following along. So how many stopovers do mallards make on their way north? This is super variable, but it can be, 3 or up to a dozen each year and can be different for the same individuals. This is why we have many, many U.S. Fish and Wildlife refuges, state lands, and other habitats well placed along each flyway so that the ducks have options because they don't have a crystal ball and each year is different. So an individual can have a different strategy among every single year that it migrates north. So we set the table to sustain the carbohydrates and the protein resources needed by these hungry ducks. Also, here's a fun one. Remember that ducks are hot. Not in a creepy Dr. Mike thinks ducks are hot way, but they run a body temperature of 105 degrees Fahrenheit normally. Mallards are relatively large and abundant animals that use a lot of energy. So to run these engines, it takes a lot of food on the landscape, especially during migration, right? It's like feeding a marathon runner, but at a population of 5 to 10 million, all needing the same resources in a short spring migration window. Think of it this way. Mallards use 20 to 30 times as much energy to sustain themselves as like-sized reptiles. So again, what we do as wildlife biologists is calculate very specifically what it takes to run that mallard engine of this continent each year, and we ensure that food resources are located in strategic locations so mallards can make it back to their breeding grounds with the fat reserves they need to successfully reproduce. And here comes the day. The old greenhead and the hen make it to North Dakota, which is already in the point of having an abundance of duck pairs everywhere. They aren't the first ones there. Few ducks have already settled, and there's only so many territories. So what's up next? How that hen, her old greenhead mate in tow, becomes 6 or more greenheads by the end of summer. So please stick with us. Hold on, folks. Don't turn that channel. We've got some really exciting news for you. The FowlWeather Podcast has teamed up with Wildlife Strategies. That's right. I'm now working directly with Ryan Delaney of Wildlife Strategies to build value into your land. Wildlife Strategies is already known for quality wildlife habitat management, be it deer, turkeys, ducks, or whatever you pursue. Ryan knows his stuff. Look, I don't add my name to just any business, but I believe in what Wildlife Strategies is doing for landowners throughout the Southeast U.S. and beyond. If you want science-based solutions to create great wildlife habitat, Wildlife Strategies is your best bet. If you're interested in ducks, when we say, may your skies be filled, well, Wildlife Strategies does just that. They fill your skies with ducks. Contact Ryan Delaney today at ryan@farmlg.com for a site visit. You won't be disappointed you did. Ryan covers the southern tier of states, and I'm available to build habitat management plans across the northern tier. Contact us today for a quote. The Wildlife Strategies team sees your property through from the initial assessment and development of a 3-year time frame management plan through annual check-ins and course corrections as needed. Contact Ryan today at ryan@farmlg.com or Dr. Mike at FowlWeather.co. You won't be disappointed you did. Fill your skies with ducks and your forests and fields with deer and turkey with Wildlife Strategies. If you are interested in wetland or other wildlife habitat consulting, please contact me at drmike@FowlWeather.co. I've been on the phone with many of you in the past few weeks, of course. Our services can be found by going to FowlWeather.co and clicking on the consulting link in the upper right corner of the page. Think about this. We also specialize in small property management for food plots and green space renewal. So let us find a way for you to kill more big bucks on those small plots. We've been doing it every year here at the farm. All right, and we are back on the mallard breeding grounds. There are many more first-year breeders here than adults because of success on the prairies the year before. Think about that. There's a lot more young ducks coming back, and all that great work done by biologists on migration and winning race has provided them the opportunity to come back and send them back north strong. But yeah, it's a mad scramble for a hen to select a breeding location. Luckily, this hen we are following, we discussed, has been here before and sets up shop with her mate. Not the same one as last year, but a mate nonetheless. In the same square mile block as last year with abundant enough grass for nesting in a shallow pothole with emerging invertebrates for protein that produces the eggs. This hen arrived with remaining lipid stores and is able to get the work right away at selecting the nesting site, which starts out simply as a bowl in the grass. As she starts to look to incubate, she'll add down feathers, but they're not there now. It's just a grass bowl. So she feeds voraciously on plentiful pothole insects and goes into what's called rapid follicle growth. Whew. The insects have little in the way of fat, so she burns the fat she acquired during migration to feed on insects that will be about 100% of the protein put into her eggs, right? She does not use body protein unless absolutely necessary. This differs from other waterfowl, but the mallard instead burns the fat acquired prior to nest initiation, during migration, and early on the breeding grounds. And each day, she goes through also mating rituals with the old greenhead, and each morning she will lay an egg. Not all eggs develop at once inside her. Rapid follicle growth starts out with about 4 ovum to be fertilized. And as the last one is ready, it is fertilized by releasing sperm that she has stored. Whew. All right. This is crazy, right? This isn't just a sperm and egg thing. She has sperm storage tubules inside her where she can store sperm up to 2 weeks. Right? But the last sperm in usually fertilizes the egg. All right. First of all, let's go with the fact that she can store sperm for 2 weeks. Dudes, you don't matter, right? Like, it's not a thing. Like, you could have been there 2 weeks ago, and she's still laying eggs, right? But the biggest thing is let's get into the Cheaters Club. Because do not take dating advice from ducks. Think about it this way. This hen has been with the same old greenhead in tow, making him do his rounds and defend her since they met in Mississippi in December, right? After her first 2 mates were shot. And now she has an abundance of new mates potentially available to her across her local breeding area. Whew. Why would she settle? So what she does is she tends to investigate other mates by flying up, quacking away, and attracting a bunch of unpaired drakes in the area. Understand that females, because they have to sit on the ground for a period of time each day to lay 1 egg per day for a total of like 8 to 12 eggs, and then sit on those eggs up to 30 days, right? and only taking 2 incubation breaks per day to drink water and feed to sustain herself, that she's also losing 25% of her body weight during incubation. All right. So again, these fat reserves matter. This is going someplace. It's basically saying, look, the investment from this hen is so great. Why wouldn't she bet hedge and try to find the best genes by cheating on the breeding grounds, right? So she's going to sit on her eggs for this period of time, lose 20% of her body weight during incubation. Those fat reserves that she has matters. When she's gone from that nest, she covers the eggs with down to sustain their temperature. And when she leaves the nest, she doesn't just fly off the nest. She walks away from the nest before flying to a nearby wetland as to not draw attention to the point the nest is at. And during this laying period and incubation, she has lots of time to get eaten by predators. She also just goes through a much more rigorous energy cycle each year than the male because she tends to the young by herself alone. We'll get to that later. The dudes are slackers. Literally, they're just greenheads, sacks of flying sperm. Overall, hens just live a more stressful and shorter life on average than the old greenhead. So I say give her some space if she wants to cheat a bit and bet hedge to find the best male. It actually makes sense at the end of the day, and her clutch or full nest of eggs, now all lined with down and ready to sit on and incubate, she may have 3 or more mallard genes in that nest. That is, she's mated with not just her male who defends her. He has special privileges, right? Whereby he probably mates the most. But there's cheating that goes on, and that male that is with her probably mates with another hen too. This is all bet hedging by the females so that they can ensure they have some strong genes that are linked with hers that will carry her genes on to the next generation. The duck world, the genes in the duck world are run by females. In all likelihood, she has much less than a 25% chance that her nest will hatch and not be predated or lost. She also has a high chance she will fox bait while sitting on the eggs at night. But this is how it happens and why 7 out of 8 hen mallard deaths are outside the hunting season or not related to hunting. Mallards die on the breeding grounds, it happens during migration, and it happens during winter. Ducks die a lot, and a lot of nests don't make it. Eggs are packed with nutrients. It's why we eat them, so it takes about 15% nest success to sustain a duck population. Luckily, there are bumper crop years that tend to happen in a row when conditions are right and mallards can reproduce and populations can grow nearly exponentially for years under these correct conditions. If you Google, quote-unquote, waterfowl status report 2024 and click on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service link to the BPOP survey, you can look through and find the mallard population through time in the upper right corner on page 9, showing the typical ups and downs of the population that is strongly linked to water on the prairies, the natural cycles that are strongly linked to water on the prairies, instant ducks, just add water. It's the cycle that happens. The prairie pothole region gets dry and then it gets very, very wet, then dry again, over and over again. Okay. Back quickly to the protein portion of the hen's life. This is also why waterfowl conservationists fight so hard to sustain quality basins with healthy invertebrate communities. 100% of a hen mallard's protein that goes into her eggs to make eggs come from the wetlands that she lives in on the breeding grounds. And her capacity to produce a full clutch of, say, 12 eggs comes from being able to quickly eat enough protein to produce the next egg. Just a day after the last egg was laid, that is insane an insane transfer of energy. These hen mallards are laying an egg per day, right? Think about producing the protein from your environment, making it into an egg, and then laying a fertilized egg once a day for 12 days. Also remember that fat reserves of that duck correlate directly with clutch size. So all the carbs on the way north during spring migration matter for duckling production. The biggest thing you've got to realize already is that this is an annual cycle where one portion of the cycle affects the next. Now we are on to hatch day. We're just going to say this nest had 10 eggs. And all 10 eggs in this hen's nest hatch. They're downy young that can feed themselves within 24 hours of hatching. They do carry yolk sacs to help keep them alive for a short period of time as they take some time to dry off and become mobile. They also may have some overland travel before getting to a wetland because most ducks do not nest in a wetland or next to a wetland. Very often they nest maybe a half mile to a mile from a wetland or at least a distance in a grassland. Mallards are grassland nesting birds. They do not nest in wetlands. They nest in grasslands next to wetlands, so those grasslands are vitally important. So this yolk sac that mallards have that allow them to survive for some period of time is the same reason why you can have day-old chickens mailed to you. They have short-term reserves in a sack that they use as food to keep themselves alive. But once the ducklings hit the water, they can eat immediately, which differs from, say, a robin, which hatches really quickly in like 12 to 14 days. Incubation's only 12 to 14 days, but they don't mature as much in the egg, so mama and papa robin have to feed the young in the nest. Unlike these parent-fed birds called altricial, robins are altricial, these ducklings instead are called precocial and can feed themselves right away because they also spend 28 days in the egg, and they come out with their eyes open with functional legs, downy feathers, and some insulation. So more time in the egg, more risk on the ground, but greater capacity to feed themselves once they leave. So they hit the wetland and start pecking at bugs out of instinct, and mama hen shows them where the best concentrations of insects are at. In these first 7 days, as the ducklings are very susceptible to everything, remember that ducks die a lot. All right, let's back up to nest success a little bit. Let's talk a bit more about nest success through historic studies. In the 1930s on the prairies, nest success was recorded at 33%. That is 33% of nests successfully hatched. In 1955, that was 22%. In 1970, that was 15%. And in 1991, that was 10%. But also remember that I mentioned that nest success has to be around 15% for a stable mallard population, right? So that 10% was the average, but some locations across the prairie pothole region still had nest success well above 30%, but there were certainly clusters of sites with nest success lower than 10%, right? These areas were all in highly degraded systems with narrow bands of like 10 yards or less of cover before you would hit cultivated fields of corn, soybean, wheat, and other crops. The synopsis from these studies was that ducks cannot continue to exist in abundance given the onslaught from marginal farming practices, concluding that modern row crop agriculture represents the greatest threat to duck nesting habitat. All right, let's take some time to talk about the delinquent dad. So old greenhead is now buggered off. He's no longer needed. The hen actually raises the ducklings by herself. Old greenhead joins a bunch of other males in what's called a molting party. It's literally called a party. Often on large wetlands, and spends the summer molting his feathers. He actually drops his flight feathers, his primaries, and is going to be flightless for 3 to 4 weeks after shedding those feathers. So what he does is he picks a great wetland with a bunch of his buddies that will sustain him for this period. And again, here, protein now really matters to the male, the old greenhead too, because that is what builds feathers. Feathers are made from protein. So he also loses all of his bright breeding plumage, and basically all that distinguishes him from the hen at this point is that bright yellow or olive bill. All right, you've been at a park in the summer and you're like, where are all the drakes? Where are all the greenheads? Where'd they go? They're probably right in front of you, but just in their basic plumage that helps them blend in during the summer and avoid predation when they can't fly. And there's also no need to spend, time and energy finding resources to produce those bright alternate or breeding plumage colors, the greenhead, the white ring, all that stuff, because there's no hen mallard around to attract. She's off raising her young. Anyhow, enough about that male. He's just a sack of sperm, as we've all learned by now. We also have hens in the square mile block on our North Dakota prairie who might be in their re-nesting effort. That is, their first and second nests actually failed in their re-nesting. This happens, right? If you fail, you don't just give up, because ducks don't live long and you get eaten by stuff and you get shot by stuff and so on. So re-nesting effort is a thing, very strong thing in a lot of mallards. In some years, like last year with good spring rains, re-nesting effort contributes really substantially to the mallard population, the fall flight. Early nesting ducks are often way more successful because they swamp the predator community. Okay, think about that. Predators can only eat so many ducks, so many eggs, and so many ducklings. So ducks basically just overwhelm the predators by having more food on the landscape than the predators can consume in that period of time. But also later in the nesting season, when there's very favorable weather conditions and good cover, there's also opportunity to contribute a lot to the fall flight. All right. But we're back to tracking this brood. We had 10 ducklings in North Dakota. Let's say one didn't make it to the wetland moving through the thick grasses. I don't know if you've ever seen ducklings, but they're like, ooh, a butterfly. And then they go off in a different direction. And, the other 9 are still moving towards the wetland, and that one's lost. There's just, ducklings that don't make it. Another 3 succumbed to hypothermia with a cold, wet rain that lasted 48 hours. And another falls prey to, whatever. Heck, when I worked as the waterfowl biologist for the state of Maine, someone brought to me a bullfrog that died trying to eat a duckling. I'll say that again. Someone brought to me a bullfrog that died trying to eat a duckling. They were both stuck together, the bullfrog's mouth wide open as possible, and the duckling wedged into its mouth, but its little stubby wings in there where the duckling couldn't come out, and both were dead. I don't know, maybe it's still in a freezer in Maine, in Bangor, Maine. It's the last place I left it. I guess it's a frog eat duck world out there, folks, but everything eats duck eggs and ducklings. You name it. Nest predators, raccoons, skunks, foxes, coyotes, ground squirrels, and ducklings that get eaten by foxes, coyotes, mink, snapping turtles, pike, hawks, and owls, and obviously bullfrogs, and so on. So goes the circle of life, right? But this hen's neighbor, too, was a quote-unquote super hen that has a brood at the end of the wetland that she raised and has 13 ducklings, all alive and looking good, and she's done this for the last 5 years, right? There are hens that live many, many years and always produce large, successful clutches and fledge them. We've detected them in our research, but they are not the norm. So now, these ducklings we've been following are growing nearly exponentially in size and feather development as they feast on the summer bugs in the wetland that are also hatching on the nearby surface. And at night, they find cover in the cattails on the wetland edge so owls don't pick them off.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
In a study in Ontario, Canada, of duckling survival, it showed that daily survival went up almost 9 times once ducklings were greater than 7 days old. So now we are into those week-old plus ducklings, and it's a wet year with seasonal basins filled with water. In North Dakota, total loss of mallard broods, so a hen completely losing her brood, complete nest or complete failure after the nesting of her ducklings. So they hatched and then went to the wetland. Total mallard brood loss was 11 times more likely when seasonal basins with water were less than 20% of the landscape compared to areas with greater than 60% of those basins filled with water. So the water on the landscape during the brood rearing period really matters. But also, duckling survival was 91% on wet years compared to 38% during dry years. However, the same study found that total brood loss was 5 times greater during rainy versus dry weather. All right, these results really seem to conflict with each other, but it depends on the timing and temperature of the rain. Rains at the right times fill basins and provide food for ducklings. But if they happen too early and they are cold, day-long, multi-day-long sustained rains, they kill ducklings by hypothermia. So the nuances of the weather on the prairies really, really matter for duck production. All right, so our ducklings have survived. We are into those days after 7 days, and a seasonal wetlands available. These wetlands are more abundant with invertebrates because of recently released nutrients and a flush of bugs that is predictable. And these conditions predictably help the ducklings grow quickly, and it takes 7 to 10 weeks for ducklings to obtain flight and move from their original wetland region. During this time, the hen also molts her feathers, as described for old greenhead, and that takes protein. The bone structure, the feathers, and the muscle in ducklings also take protein, right? A lot of this is not about carbohydrates. It's not about seeds. This is about insects and other bugs in the wetlands. Again, we go back to what ducks need on the breeding grounds. They need healthy invertebrate communities, which happens when we keep our waters clean. What keeps me up at night is that water quality is considered poor in about 80% of basins in the prairie pothole region of northeast South Dakota from agricultural pollution. You see, plowing right to the edge of a wetland greatly changes the water chemistry, and invertebrate populations plummet. We also have a family of pesticide coatings on corn, soybean, and other seeds called neonicotinoids. I'll call them neonics. These are used as a fungicide and then also taken up by the plant to keep them from being eaten by insects. But it turns out they have a half-life of greater than 365 days, which means they stay in the soil for more than 1 year. And if you plant corn and soy in rotation, they build in the soil over and over and leach into wetlands. Experiments in labs have shown that 50 parts per million of neonics in water can reduce invertebrate populations by 50%. But now, some prairie wetlands are hitting 2,000 parts per million of neonics. This can't be helping us either. We really do need to find a way to keep our prairie wetlands clean and abundant enough in invertebrates for ducklings to feed, survive, and become part of the fall flight to become ducks over your decoys. It's not in your backyard, but it is in the marshes of your life. Whew, that's a lot, but we are looking to link that ecology of what mallards need with the real world out there and how waterfowl science, conservation, and management works for duck hunters. So now these ducklings are able to fly. It's pretty bulky at first, short flights locally to get those muscles fit, but very soon these ducks start to disperse. Some of my own research with master's student and now state of Maryland waterfowl biologist Kayla Harvey showed that the ducks we banned across the Mississippi and Atlantic flyways have likely already started to move long distances during August and September to end up being banded at the locations they are caught. That is, from Kayla's master's thesis, we detected that mallards in, say, New York, well, about 50% of them that we banded actually originated in Canada, maybe as far north as Ottawa, flying south for us to ban them in early September in central New York. Same for places in the Mississippi flyway. The point? Once these ducklings can start flying, they move out of bug-filled wetlands and start to look for those more productive soils with plants producing carbohydrates because they are likely back into the season when fat and fat storage starts to matter. That said, from my experiences across 3 flyways during banding season and into early fall, it does appear that initial movements are into more permanent wetlands, not those moist soil locations focused on carbs as much, even if they are flooded early. The mallards don't seem to find those seed-filled areas until later. Probably, hens coming off nesting and ducklings are still seeking protein very early during fall migration and then shift towards seeds, tubers, and waste grains as that carbohydrate need increases. This also is probably why during early migration, early water is key to developing a duck pattern to your location. When I lived on the north shore of the Great Lakes in Ontario, Canada for several years, it always amazed me that you could get pretty much every single duck in your decoy spread on opening day on the 3rd Saturday in September, even though no weather had made them move yet. We talk about this way back in episode 6 of the FowlWeather Podcast, A Tale of Two Migrations. Anyhow, ducks are on the move, so have a listen to episode 6 to hear why ducks move, even though weather doesn't make them move yet. We are now we're finally into the fall migration, back at that, almost full circle, and food is pretty much abundant. But floodwaters are limited. The late summer and early fall kind of can be the worst time of year for available habitat, and that is why managers focus on ensuring water is on the landscape early in emergent wetlands with places with submerged aquatic vegetation like coontail, milfoil, and pondweeds, and perennial plants like sedges, rushes, arrowhead that produce food directly but also produce an abundance of invertebrates living among them. The season moves on. Guns start to blast. The guns hit again. The hens have seen this before, and the male follows behind. Her mate, now newly found because she lost her first one already, not even close to the same old greenhead from last year. He also gets hit on the 2nd day of season in Iowa, and he's gone. So she's on to the next lad within 24 hours. They find a little corner of a state wildlife management area. It's kind of difficult to get to, and it's underhunted, and so they do their pair bonding, and they hang out quietly for 5 days. But Saturday comes, and a flashlight hits them in the dark. The hen jumps first, then the old greenhead. He follows his mate, and she leads. The next stop is along the river at a national wildlife refuge, a pure sanctuary. That place is gold. Good food for days, and they stay till the weather hits. They make nightly flights to cornfields to get carbs quickly, but then meet their nutritional needs in the moist soil and perennial wetlands along that river as they feed on natural wetland seeds. The icing continues to move in, but hey, they can sustain. It's not until late October until that first cold front hits. A small snow comes in, but not much. They can still field feed, but soon the geese will show up from the north, and the field will start to get thin with food. They adjust by moving downriver a bit and find another field not exploited like those in the north, but still in Iowa, almost into Missouri now. The next jump is again short, but a bit longer, headed to Grand Pass Wildlife Management Area in Missouri in mid-November. The place is half refuge and half hunted. They make flights each morning from the refuge to feed, mostly onto local private lands, local hunt clubs that only hunt a few days per week but provide an abundance of food for hungry ducks. Remember, this isn't yet the season of sitting it out. This is the season of fattening, so you can go south if you need to, but these mallards are preparing for the next cold front because that has been the evolved mechanism that has kept them alive and passed on through the genetic code. Get fat in November to December so you can make that long flight farther south if needed. But that cold really never comes, and it never came last October to December, which was the warmest 3-year period in 130 years in the contiguous United States. But the ducks still stored fat as bet hedging for a cold front that might come, but never came. Then, when it came to January, the snow still had not yet come in abundance, and these ducks had fat reserves to sit it out. They went and sat on a river. Some of the mallards at Grand Pass made different decisions or didn't find food as well. Remember, ducks are different. They're not all carbon copies of each other, and all have different life experiences within a year and across years, so some of them buggered off and headed south into the gunfire of Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana. You see, duck season at this point is closed in Missouri too. So that cold, it just came too late to have the combined pressure of guns and weather to make these ducks move. And now, sitting at Grand Pass, this hen moves freely and exploits food as needed. Deeper in the south, another hen sits tightly to a refuge, having gone through 3 old greenheads and now pairing with her 4th. She holds them tight. But once the guns go silent, they move about the landscape. The farmer, the duck hunter, the club manager, and the bird watcher all see more ducks spread across the landscape. And so the cycle continues, and we are back into the season when we really need to feed that old hen mallard and her greenhead and send them back strong. Spring is here for some, but in places like the farm in Jack's Reef, we still have 2.5 feet of snow and 12 plus inches of ice on our lakes. It continues to be my opinion that our southern brethren can't just quite understand the level of snow and cold at our landscape. I do need all the good people across duck country USA to understand that in the 13 years of living at the farm, this is among our top 3 best winters. We actually have enough snow and ice to move ducks out, but the frequency of those events, as far as we've seen over the years, is decreasing. Is it all about the weather? No, it is not. But if you have listened today, you should see that a lot about a duck's life depends on the weather. The variability in the weather between years and at predictable periods is what drives duck populations. And if that pattern of weather is changing in a single direction through time, we might see a change in how ducks react to it. From what we've seen, the weather on the prairies goes through cycles of wet and dry and wet and dry. And ducks will return to the prairies every single year. And as they move south, we seemingly have a decreased frequency of very cold winters that are moving ducks to the south. But those still happen, and they happen at irregular intervals. That is what the FowlWeather Podcast largely is doing, is helping predict those years and the times when you should see a good influx of ducks south. I hope you've enjoyed the annual cycle of the hen mallard and her old greenhead in tow. In our next episode, we get into mallard population and harvest management through time. We would detail mallard population surveys and harvest management from the smoke-filled rooms with politics up through our current structured decision-making using adaptive harvest management and integrated population models. So hold on, my friends. The mighty greenhead will be back with us for the next 2 episodes. Thanks for listening, and as always, may your skies be filled and shoot straight, my friends.